You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode, we're reviewing the first semi-final of the ICC Champions Trophy for 2025 between India and Australia. The last time India and Australia met in an ODI was the World Cup final in 2023, and this Champions Trophy semi-final between the two teams was sure to be an exciting contest. India got their revenge over Australia and qualified for their fifth Champions Trophy final, all thanks to Virat Kohli anchoring the run chase and their four-man spin attack. For Australia, it was always going to be a challenge with a depleted bowling attack, and having to play in Dubai for the first time in this tournament was always going to be a challenge that they had to face. And it was certainly a big challenge for Australia. And unfortunately, in the end, Australia went on to lose this semi-final. India were too strong in the end. And India, the best team in the tournament. And it was no surprise that India won this semi-final against Australia. But despite that, it was a game that, had some good batting and good bowling throughout. India and Australia, always a good contest. Both teams fought very hard. Both teams had to work hard. But in the end, India prevailed and got the win over Australia. So they will be very delighted. They've booked their spot in the final on Sunday against New Zealand, who won the other semi-final against South Africa. So India definitely in the prime position to win their third Champions Trophy title in their fifth final of asking. For Australia, as we've mentioned, depleted bowling attack, no Cummins, Stark and Hazelwood. No one really predicted them to be in the semi-finals, but they were able to qualify for the semi-finals. And also for Steve Smith, he captained superbly throughout the whole tournament for Australia and also announced his retirement from one-day cricket following this semi-final defeat against India, which is marking an end of an era of Australian cricket in terms of Steve Smith and his retirement from one-day cricket, which we'll talk about a bit later on in this episode today. So there's plenty to talk about from this first semi-final of this Champions Trophy between India and Australia. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. And first of all, have a look back at how the game panned out in terms of the scores. Let's quickly have a look at the match summary. Australia batted first and made 264 all out. Steve Smith top scored with 73. Mohammad Shami took 3 wickets for India. India needed 265 runs to win. They chased it down with ease, really, with a couple of overs to spare. They finished on 6 for 267. Virat Kohli top scored with 84 and 2 wickets each for Nathan Ellis and Adam Zampa. India won by 4 wickets and Virat Kohli, not a surprise, he was named the player of the match for his 84 in the run chase. So that's pretty much how this first semi-final of this Champions Trophy between India and Australia panned out in Dubai. Now, what were some of the key moments and key factors that really determined where this game ended up in India's favour? There were a couple, really, that stood out for me. For Australia, a key moment there was the partnership between Smith and Carey. Now, Australia were looking pretty good. They lost a few wickets, and then Smith and Carey came to the crease. They put on a very good partnership of 54 for the 5th wicket. And that partnership looked pretty comfortable. They were both scoring freely. Australia were tracking to be probably nearly close to 300 at that stage with that partnership. But I think that's where the game turned in India's favour, and that's where Australia went backwards in this semi-final. Once the partnership was broken between Smith and Carey, Australia got really themselves into trouble, really. They lost too many wickets towards the end. That put a lot of pressure on them to try and get a score of over 250 at one stage. They were struggling at 6 for 205 when they lost Glenn Maxwell. But when they lost Smith and they lost Maxwell in quick succession, all the pressure went on Alex Carey, who was batting with the tail. And Carey did a pretty good job with the tail. He went on to make 61, but then he got out, and then it was up to the tail enders to try and get the runs at the end in terms of Dorsius, Sampras, Ellis and Sanger trying to get Australia to that 264 score. So that was where probably the match really turned in India's favour in terms of that partnership, breaking that partnership, getting Smith out, then Maxwell, put a lot of pressure on Carey, and then the tailenders came in and obviously Australia were bowled out. So that was a key moment in this game. If that partnership between Smith and Carey went on, Australia probably would have got close to maybe 300, maybe a competitive total. In the end, they got to 264, which wasn't enough. And the other key moment was when India's run chase, I should say, Virat Kohli's innings of 84, plus the partnership that he had with Shreyas Iyer of 91 for the third wicket, pretty much set up this run chase for India. They didn't need to do anything rash. The run rate required was probably 5.5 runs and over at the start of the innings. They needed to work the gaps, work the singles, the twos, and then if this inexperienced bowling attack from Australia bowled a bad ball, which is guaranteed that they will probably bowl a bad ball in an over, hit it away for a boundary or 6, which they did. But Kohli's innings, the partnership he had with Shreyas Iyer, pretty much set up this run chase for India, and it allowed the finishers to come in and KL Rahul and Hardik Pandya to finish off the innings, and India were able to get the win. So those were a couple of key moments and factors that really determined how this game went into India's favour, and that's why they went on to win this semi-final against Australia and book their place in the final on Sunday against New Zealand. Now then, let's talk about India's performance in this first semi-final of this Champions Trophy against Australia. And we'll talk about their performance. It was a really clinical, dominant performance by India. Not a surprise. They've been the informed team in this Champions Trophy. And they booked their place in the Champions Trophy final on Sunday against New Zealand. And for India, it's their 5th ICC Champions Trophy final. That's a lot of finals to be in. They've only won 2 Champions Trophies, India. They'll be looking to win their 3rd. And I do believe to become the first ever team in Champions Trophy history to win 3 Champions Trophy titles. And they are certainly the favourites to win, but it's going to be a very interesting contest against New Zealand. But going back on this game here for India, dominant performance with bat and ball. We'll start with the batting side of things. Chasing 264 was pretty comfortable in the end. They finished on 6 for 267. They won by 4 wickets in the end. They had a couple of overs to spare. It was a pretty easy job, really. They weren't under pressure at all. The pitch in the second innings got a bit easier to bat on. This pitch in this semi-final that India played Australia was a lot easier to bat on than the pitch that India played in the group match against New Zealand in Dubai, where it was very difficult. And New Zealand struggled to chase down 250 batting second because the ball was turning and the pitch was a bit slow. But in this semi-final, the pitch was very easy to bat on. Not much turn, not much grip for the spinners. It got better as the second innings progressed. And India weren't really under pressure. They really played it sensibly, really. They really calculated the run chase very well. Virat Kohli was the standout. His 84 pretty much anchored the innings for India. His partnership with Shreyas Iyer for the 3rd wicket of 91 pretty much set up the run chase for India. And that allowed KL Rahul to come in and smash 42 not out at the end. And Hardik Pandya came in and smashed a quick 28 off 24 to really get India over the line. So the run chase for India was pretty simple, pretty easy. And they just did it with ease, which is no surprise given the inexperienced bowling attack that Australia had. It wasn't a surprise that India batted this comfortably, because when you have a look at India's batting lineup, they bat all the way from pretty much 1 to 11, just about. You know, you got Rohit Sharma, you got Gill, you got Kohli, you got Shreyas Iyer, you got Axel Patel, who's batting at number 5, and then you've got KL Rahul, and then Hardik Pandya. Jadeja can bat a bit. Even Mohammad Shami, he can swing the willow. He's got a few Test half centuries in his career. So India do bat all the way down. They do bat deep. And it was always going to be an easy run chase for them. And that's the other thing as well, playing a lot of games in Dubai. Now, obviously, we know the reasons why India are playing in Dubai in this Champions Trophy, obviously, because we know the reasons between them and Pakistan over the years. Everyone's saying that this is a big advantage for India playing in Dubai because of the surface and playing a lot of games in Dubai. That does give India an advantage. And it does give them an advantage because, well, when you look at it, they played 3 group games here in Dubai, plus the semi-final, so that's 4. And then the final against New Zealand, they would play their 5th straight game in Dubai. And you compare that with New Zealand, who will play their 2nd game in Dubai because they played India in the group match in Dubai where they lost. So just shows you that it's a big advantage for India, and they did it quite comfortably in the end. So they're batting pretty good. Rohit Sharma, Gill missed out, but Virat Kohli scored runs. He's had a pretty good tournament, Virat Kohli, given that his form slump in Test cricket. But in this Champions Trophy, he's crossed over 14,000 ODI runs. He's played 300 ODIs for India, which is probably not going to happen again in this modern era with the way that one-day cricket's going at the moment. He was able to anchor the innings and play really well. So, yeah, in the end, the run chase wasn't an issue for India. They weren't really tested, and Australia didn't pick up early wickets. If India lost a few early wickets, it would have been interesting. But they held their own. They kept their cool. They held their nerve, and they didn't succumb to the pressure. They just kept it really simple, and they were able to do the basics well with the bat. The bowling side of things was pretty good. Coming into this game was the talk about the spinners. How will Jadeja, Kuldeep Yadav, Chakravarti, Axel Patel go about things? They bowled pretty well. They were very economical. Axel Patel picked up wickets. He picked up a wicket. Jadeja picked up 2. Kuldeep Yadav wasn't really effective. He went for some tap, 44 off his 8 overs for no wickets. And Chakravarti bowled really well. He bowled well in the game against New Zealand, where he picked up 5 wickets in that group match. He bowled well again. So the Indian spinners really kept the Australian batters tied down in the middle overs. And that was always going to be a challenge for Australia. And coming into this game, how the Indian spinners will go about things. They did a pretty good job as usual. Mohammad Shami did well. He picked up 3 wickets. Hardik Pandya picked up a wicket. So it was a very team-orientated bowling effort from India. Everyone contributed. Everyone was able to do their job. And they did it very well, and they were able to pick up wickets. Once Australia got a partnership established, they were able to get a breakthrough and really put Australia under pressure. So the bowling performance from India was a pretty strong performance, and not a surprise given that they are the favourites to win this tournament. It's whether or not they can win. It's their tournament to lose now, but they will come up against a very determined New Zealand side who won their semi-final against South Africa. So to finish up about India, a very clinical team performance, a very good batting performance in the run chase, thanks to Virat Kohli and Shreyas Iyer and that partnership. Some good finishing skills there from KL Rahul and Hardik Pandya. The bowling attack, the spinners did their job in terms of taking wickets, keeping Australia tied down in the middle overs of the innings, and that really put Australia on the back foot. So it was a very clinical performance by India, and it just shows why they are the team to win this Champions Trophy. And at the end of the day, they were simply too strong for this Australian team. We move on from India and talk about Australia, talk about their performance in this Champions Trophy first semi-final against India. And for Australia, it was a very disappointing performance, you'll have to say. I think a little bit disappointing, but also knowing that they were able to make the semi-finals is a good achievement. No one really predicted Australia to be here in the semi-finals, given that they didn't have Stark, didn't have Hazelwood, didn't have Cummins, didn't have Mitchell Marsh. Marcus Stoinis was retired. It was a team that was heavily depleted. You're asking Ben Dorshus, Nathan Ellis, Tanvir Sangha, Cooper Connolly, Matt Short, who haven't had much experience in one-day cricket to come in and do the job. And I suppose for Australia, reaching the semi-finals, despite their challenges, was a very good achievement for this team. In the end, they came up against an Indian side that is the number one team in this tournament. They're the favourites to win. And for Australia, their batting was always going to be important in terms of trying to get a score if they were batting first, which they were in this game, or batting second to try and chase down a target. And their bowling was always going to be tested regardless. So I think they'll be disappointed in the end not to win, but I think they should be happy, take some solace that they made it to a semi-final, given the challenges that they encountered throughout this tournament. The batting side of things, 264 Australia made in the end, batting first in 49.3 overs. So they were bowled out with 3 overs to spare of the innings. A lot of people said 264 was a good score. Some people said it was a good score, maybe a bit difficult for India to chase down. Others said it was below par and that Australia should have got around about that 280 mark, 290, close to 300, because this pitch for this semi-final against India wasn't as difficult as the other pitches that we've seen here in Dubai in the games against India and Bangladesh, India and Pakistan, and even in the game against India and New Zealand, where India batted first and made 249, New Zealand were bowled out and couldn't even chase down 250. So this was a better pitch compared to those other pitches on the square. And unfortunately for Australia, it just wasn't enough, really, in the end. The common theme from Australia in the batting was they lost wickets. They lost too many wickets. They didn't build big partnerships at all. They kept losing wickets, and that kept stalling the momentum. And that's so important in one-day cricket. You need momentum. You lose wickets, it stops momentum. Then you have to rebuild. And then you lose a wicket. You have to rebuild again. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of overs out of the game. And it does hamper you in terms of posting a very competitive total. And that's what happened with Australia here. It was disappointing, really. Some of the dismissals, Cooper Connolly for a start. And obviously, let's not be harsh on Cooper Connolly. Look, he was only brought in because of Matt Short's injury. So Australia wanted him to be in the side. They wanted him to open the batting. They wanted him for the left arm spin option because they knew here in Dubai that the spinners were going to have a big role to play. And really, at the end of the day, the spinners really, there wasn't really much turn really on this pitch. It didn't turn all that much. So maybe both teams thought, it would do a lot, but it didn't. But going back to Cooper Connolly, it was a soft dismissal at the top of the order. When he was batting with Travis Head, both of them struggled at the start. The innings wasn't really off to a good start. Both Travis Head and Connolly struggled. Connolly especially struggled to Mohammad Shami. And Cooper Connolly was swinging like a rusty gate. He kept swinging. He kept playing and missing. He didn't do anything different. He got tied down. It was inevitable that he was going to get out, and it did happen. He got out. He got a toe end. He nicked it straight through to the gloves of KL Rahul. And it's understandable given that Cooper Connolly hasn't played against India before. He hasn't faced Mohammad Shami before either. And you know what Shami's like. He's a very quality bowler. He's gonna probe away in a line and length, like he does in Test cricket. So that was a soft dismissal. And then you had some other soft dismissals as well. Josh Inglis, he looked good, but then he chipped it straight to cover. He got out to Jadeja for 11. He chipped it straight to Virat Kohli at cover. That was a soft dismissal. Glenn Maxwell's was a horrible dismissal, getting out bowled for 7 by Axel Patel. That was hit or miss. You know what you're going to get with Glenn Maxwell. You're going to get the good and the bad, and we already know that. But that was a terrible dismissal. Steve Smith's dismissal was a bit of a weird one. He missed a full toss by Mohammad Shami and got bowled for 73. He looked very good, Steve Smith. And obviously we now know that this game was Steve Smith's final ODI as an Australian cricketer because he announced his retirement. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But even his dismissal was a bit weird. So there were some soft dismissals in the Australian innings. And that really cost them. Really, even Marnus Labuschagne getting caught on the crease with one that didn't turn from Jadeja and went straight on with the arm. Now, that was a soft dismissal as well. Probably Marnus should have gone forward to that, not back, and not playing back on the crease to Jadeja. You should be looking to play forward. And Marnus, He's in a bit of a form slump. His mind's a bit scrambled. He made 29. So Australia had good partnerships, as I mentioned. They had a half-century partnership, 50 for the second wicket between Travis Head and Smith. A third wicket partnership, Smith and Labuschagne, 56. They had a pretty good partnership for the fourth wicket, 34 between Smith and Inglis. The fifth wicket, 54 between Smith and Carey. There were very good partnerships, but they didn't go on because Australia kept losing wickets, and that really set them back. I think where the innings changed for Australia was probably the Smith and Carey partnership. Both Smith and Carey were batting superbly because of Steve Smith's wonderful form of late. Obviously, the Test series in Sri Lanka, the Test series against India in the home summer in Australia. Alex Carey's been in superb touch for the last couple of years. He was $1 million in this game. Very good. That partnership was developing. But once Smith got out and missed that full toss from Shami, that's where the innings started to change. So Smith went. Australia were 5 for 198 in the 37th over, the fourth delivery of the 37th over. Smith departed. So 5 for 198. Okay, Australia need another partnership, rebuild, probably get over 250. Glenn Maxwell comes in. Bang, gone. 6 for 205 in the 38th over. And that put a lot of pressure on Alex Carey to bat with the tail. And he did very well, Kes. I think he did very well to bat with the tail. He had a pretty good partnership with Ben Dorshers of 34 for the seventh wicket, and then he ran himself out. That's understandable. Carey was looking for the second, got run out. It was a very good piece of fielding from Shreyas Iyer that hit the stumps, and direct hit. Alex Carey was gone well short of his ground. But I thought Carey did very well to try and help Australia get to that score of 264. But that put a lot of pressure on Carey to really try and get Australia up to a competitive total. That was the problem with Australia. They lost wickets. There were some soft dismissals with the batting. And when you lose wickets, you lose momentum. And that's what happened. And Australia didn't really recover from that, really. So that's the batting side of things with Australia. Didn't really quite fire in this game. But as we've already mentioned, and I think everyone knows when this episode of the podcast comes out, that Steve Smith retired from ODI cricket. And, well, we've got to say it's an end of an era of Australian cricket that Steve Smith's retired from one-day cricket. I thought he played magnificently in this game. 73 of 96. It was a typical Steve Smith innings. He played some lovely shots up until he got out when he got bowled by Mohammad Shami, which was a bit of a weird dismissal because you don't expect Steve Smith to miss a full delivery, especially a full toss. You expect him to put that away, but he didn't on that occasion. Maybe the retirement, maybe the emotions of playing his last ever ODI, I don't know, maybe came into his mind, knowing that this is the end of my one-day career. But apart from that, I thought he led pretty well in this Champions Trophy with a depleted Australian team. It's not a surprise that he announced his retirement. He thinks the time is right and for him to focus on his Test career and other things in his cricket career. So we wish Steve all the best, obviously. So Steve Smith, end of an era with his one-day cricket. But he should be proud of his efforts in this Champions Trophy. To lead an Australian team that was depleted severely, without Cummins, Stark and Hazelwood, without Mitchell Marsh and Marcus Stoinis, I thought he did a pretty good job from the captaincy point of view. And he also batted well in this semi-final. Unfortunately, he couldn't go on and make a big 100, but I suppose that's the game of cricket. So pretty much with Australia's batting, probably Smith and Carey were the two batters that looked pretty good in this semi-final. Everyone else struggled. Travis Head, he struggled at the start, didn't get going in that partnership with Connolly. But once Connolly got out and Smith joined him, he was able to tee off. But Travis Head, he was the key in terms of Australia getting a good target. But really the common theme was they kept losing wickets and they kept stalling. And the momentum was lost. And they couldn't rebuild the momentum. They lost a wicket, formed a partnership, lost a wicket, had to do it again. It takes a lot of time and effort to do that. You lose momentum, you lose flow, you lose tempo and rhythm in the innings. And that's what happened with Australia, really. So that's pretty much what happened with the batting side of things from Australia. The bowling side of things, they're always going to be tested. Defending 264 was going to be a challenge. And really, quite simply, the the problem was they didn't take early wickets. They didn't put India under pressure. And that was the main theme with the bowling, is that it wasn't a surprise, given the inexperience of Dorcas, Ellis and Sanger, even Cooper Connolly, who was in the side for the semi-final. It was a matter of time before that inexperience was going to be shown, and it was shown in this semi-final. They didn't take early wickets, and if they were going to defend 264, they needed to pick up early wickets in the power play. But unfortunately for Australia, they couldn't do that. The partnership that Virat Kohli and Shreyas Iyer had was doing it easily. They weren't under pressure. There weren't too many dot balls from an Australian point of view. They didn't pick up wickets when they needed to. And you have to say the fielding was pretty poor from Australia as well. There were some drop catches. Cooper Connolly dropped Rohit Sharma on 13. That was off the bowling of Nathan Ellis. Then Marnus Labuschagne dropped Rohit Sharma again on 15. That was off the bowling of Ben Dorcas. And then Glenn Maxwell dropped Virat Kohli on 51. And that was off the bowling of Cooper Connolly. What I'll say with that one, with Glenn Maxwell's dropped catch, is that I think Cooper Connolly should have gone for that caught and bowled. It was to his left. He could have easily moved to his left and caught that return catch from Kohli. But Glenn Maxwell was at a sort of short, straight mid-off, and he dived to his right with the one hand. And they either stick or they don't if you go with the one-hand option. So I think Cooper Connolly was put off a little bit by Maxwell there at short, straight mid-off. And he thought, hang on, Maxwell's there. I'll let it go and he'll catch it. But in the end, he didn't. So drop catches, lack of wickets up front cost Australia, and lack of pressure in terms of dot balls. And really, that's what happened with the bowling, really. And unfortunately for Australia, they weren't able to keep the pressure on India. They weren't able to pick up those wickets. So that really put them on the back foot. But I suppose with this Australian bowling attack, we do know the inexperience. We do know that they had many challenges. But I thought throughout the whole entire tournament, they did very well. Dorcas, Ellis, even Spencer Johnson, did very well to pick up wickets and tried their best. So I think for Australia, despite not winning this semi-final and the bowling attack that they had in this tournament, it's good experience for players like Dorcas, Ellis, Sanger, even Connolly, who came in for this game for Matt Short because of his injury. Even Spencer Johnson, who played in the tournament. Good experience for them going forward. And that's the positive, really. But quite simply with Australia's bowling, weren't able to pick up wickets early in the power play. They weren't able to put India under some sort of pressure. There were too many easy singles, and they weren't able to put the pressure on India by taking wickets and applying that with dot balls as well. So that's pretty much happened for Australia in terms of their bowling performance. And overall, as a team performance, I think when they look back, they'll be disappointed with the batting, losing wickets at the wrong time, the bowling side of things, not being able to pick up early wickets and put pressure on India. And that was the problem, really. So for Australia, yes, disappointing not to win the semi-final. But for Australia, I think it's a good achievement. Given the challenges that they had, there was no Stark, Hazelwood and Cummins in the bowling department. There was obviously no Mitchell Marsh and Marcus Stoinis. Despite that, and despite the challenges, I think reaching a semi-final of a Champions Trophy or any sort of tournament is a great achievement. And I think this Australian team, despite the challenges, despite the personnel missing from this tournament, I think they should be very happy with their achievement of reaching the semi-finals. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go their way, but that's cricket. That happens. You move on and try and get better and hopefully be back in the same position again for another tournament. But for Australia, it probably wasn't their best performance, but they gave it a go. They fought until the end, and that's the main thing. At least they didn't give up. They fought until the end, and unfortunately, they came up against a very good Indian side. As we predicted before the match, India were far too strong for Australia. It was a complete performance by India in this semi-final with bat and ball. Now they await New Zealand in the final on Sunday and looking to claim their third ever Champions Trophy title. For Australia, they fought until the end. For an undermanned team, they did well to make the semi-finals. For Steve Smith, having announced his ODI retirement after this semi-final defeat, It's not what he wanted to end his ODI career, but he should be proud of the way he led the team during this Champions Trophy. Thanks everyone for listening to our review of this first semi-final of this ICC Champions Trophy for 2025 between India and Australia. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this first semi-final of this ICC Champions Trophy for 2025 between India and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.